Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC Guy. Today I'm going to start a new series of videos called the DCC Guy Quick Tips. And what that is going to be is I'm going to go back and take another look at some of the subjects that I've done videos in the past. And I'm just going to hit on the most salient, important points in each subject area and then refer you back to those other videos, which are just a lot more comprehensive. And that way, it'll be a way of reintroducing video topics to people who are new to the channel and haven't maybe followed it as long as some of the others here. So what I want to do today is talk about soldering. The main reason that I want to start with soldering is because I get a lot of questions still about how to go about getting good solder joints. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 4 basic requirements for getting good solder joints. Now, before I go on, I want to take a second to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Also, don't forget, give us a thumbs up at the end of the video if you enjoyed it. And that way, it helps to promote the channel on YouTube. Thanks now. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look then at how you can go about getting good, solid solder joints. Now, the basic requirement for any solder joint is that everything has to be clean, because basically even nickel silver oxidizes, and that oxide is not going to be easily soldered too. So you need to get that off. You need to get any crud that has accumulated on whatever it is you're soldering off of there. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You can use a little bit of sandpaper and or sanding sticks that you can buy from companies like Micromark. I particularly like this scratch brush. And what that is, this is a little retractable brush. You just screw it like that, and this brush here can come out or go back in. And this one here is made out of brass. They also come in steel and fiberglass. Now, I recommend the brass because it does the best job. The steel works fairly well for soldering projects too, because it is good for cleaning off rails and other things that you might be soldering. The fiberglass, it tends to break apart, and I ended up with little pieces of fiberglass embedded in my fingertips, so I don't use it at all. But at any rate, just take your scratch brush and clean off the ends of the rails before you attach your rail joiners to them. Clean off the sides of the rails if you're adding feeders to them, things of that nature. And that goes, you can use this for just about anything except circuit boards. And generally with circuit boards, it's not an issue, and they're pretty resistant to oxidation and generally don't need cleaning of any sort. But for a lot of other components, you do need to clean off the rails. So that's the most important thing. Get them clean before you try to start soldering. Okay, let's go ahead on to tip number 2, and that involves your soldering iron, and specifically the tip. You want to keep that soldering iron tip hot and clean, and they go together, because if you keep it clean, it's going to heat up faster and transfer heat faster to the piece of work that you're soldering. Now, if you look closely at this one, you will see that it's nice silvery looking. That's because it's got a good coating of solder on it. It looks wet. And that's the term that you hear most from people, is that you should always have your tip looking wet. And that means having a good coating of solder across it. Now, if it's dirty, you have to clean that tip. And there's one way to do that. And that is to buy some of this tip cleaner. And it's sort of a paste-like material. I believe it's made of flux and solder mixed in with it. And what happens is when you run your tip across it, then it takes that oxidation and crud off of it and plates it with a fresh coat of solder. So it will transfer the heat quickly to the work that you're working on. Then when you are doing your soldering, you should periodically clean it. And there's 2 ways to do that. This particular soldering iron stand came with a little sponge here, and you can keep that moist and then brush the tip of your soldering iron across it periodically to clean it off. However, this one also came with this what looks like a Brillo pad, and it's just brass shavings. And you can periodically just put your tip down in that, and it will remove all of the dirt and crud, oxidation that builds up on your tip, excess solder, and give you a nice clean solder tip. So that's what you can do. Also, you can purchase these things separately from companies like Mauser and All Electronics, and anybody that sells soldering irons and solder probably sells these. And so it's just great to have these around to clean your soldering iron. I use these. I don't hardly use the sponge anymore. It's also important, as I said, to keep it hot. Now, in most cases, that means about the melting point of solder. However, in this case, as you can see here, I've got this one set at 800 degrees. Now, the reason for that is I've got this little pinpoint soldering iron tip here, and that doesn't transfer heat very quickly. If this was a big, flat, broad tip, like a screwdriver tip, then it could transfer a lot of heat, and I would be able to lower the heat of the tip accordingly. However, because of this very fine pencil tip on here, and I use that a lot, mainly because if you're working with circuit boards and fine wiring, DCC and the like, you want a nice pencil tip to work with. You don't want to be melting your insulation and everything else around it. So I use this one a lot. I use this one for even attaching feeders to rails. But that works well. And, you know, all you have to do is get that temperature up, keep it up so it's going to transfer that heat to the work quite efficiently. And that's my way of doing it. Now, another thing that's very important is flux. The purpose of flux is to remove the oxides as they build up while you're doing your soldering and prevent those oxides from contaminating your solder joint. And there's two ways that you can use flux. Now, most solder comes with resin core. Now, a resin, or is another name, it's another type of flux. Now, a resin is traditionally made from pine sap, and it's just very highly refined, and a lot of it is built into the core of your solder. So you may not need it in most applications. However, for a lot of applications like where I'm going to be using a lot of heat, such as soldering feeders to rails or soldering rail joiners to rails, that kind of work that requires a lot of heat and may take a little bit longer, I go ahead and I use a good paste flux. So it looks just like that. It's sort of like a brown jelly, and so that's your resin, and I think it has something like some other organic solvent in it to keep it from hardening. And you just apply a little bit of that with the tip of a brush, or you can use something like one of those micro brushes. Anything, just apply a little bit of this to the work, and that will prevent the buildup of oxides while you're soldering and give you a good, clean solder joint in the end. It's also important to clean the flux off. Clean your solder joints after you're done using some alcohol on a brush. And that's, again, where I use these little micro brushes. Now, another thing I want to point out about fluxes is there is your resin flux, and then there are acid fluxes. And acid fluxes are typically what you use for plumbing work, things of that nature. Never use acid fluxes on anything related to model railroading or electronics in general, because that acid flux, it's hard to clean out. The acid will corrode your joints over time if you don't get them cleaned out thoroughly, and it's just a very, very bad situation. So if you have any flux and it has zinc chloride in it, forget it. Throw it away, or save it for doing plumbing work in your house. Do not use acid fluxes with anything involving electronics. Okay, finally, we get into tip number 4. You should always apply the tip of the soldering iron to whatever you're soldering, heat that up, and then you can touch the solder to it. Once the piece of work is heated sufficiently and you can touch a piece of solder to it and it will melt, then it's ready to be soldered. Do not attempt to apply solder to the tip of the soldering iron and apply that to a joint. It's not going to work. Both pieces of work need to be at the melting point of solder in order for the solder to make a successful hard joint. So go ahead and do that. So again, Pre-tin your work, heat it up to where that the solder can be applied directly to the joint, and it will melt as soon as it hits the metal. Do not apply solder to your soldering iron tip and apply that to your work. It's just not going to give you a good solder joint. Okay, so those are the 4 requirements for getting good solid solder joints. And at the end of this video, I will put up links to 2 or 3 of the most important videos that I have done previously on soldering. So I recommend you go ahead and take a look at those. Also, in the description to this video, I have included the numbers for all of the videos that I have done that specifically involve soldering work. So go back and review those videos, and I think they will give you a good basic understanding of how you can go about successfully completing your soldering chores. So that's it for today's video. Have a good one, and we'll see you here with another video from the DCC Guide coming up soon.